In 1969, 9 kilograms of rock fell on Allende, Mexico, and inside it we found grains of dust older than the sun. In 1984, a 20-year-old blue-white rock was picked up on the Antarctic ice, and it turned out to have left Mars 4 billion years ago, and Earth's atmosphere had let it through without so much as scorching a corner. In 2013, a rock 40 meters across came apart over Chelyabinsk with the light output of 100 suns, and it injured 1,500 people who never saw it coming until the flash was already on their retinas. 3 rocks, 3 separate arrivals, 3 separate decades. And after all of that, most people who consider themselves scientifically literate still cannot tell you the one fact that actually matters about any rock that falls from the sky: where, precisely, it came from and how we know. That is what I want to talk to you about today, because a new meteorite has everyone talking, and I have read the comments, and I have read the articles written by people who should know better, and I am going to tell you exactly where the thinking goes wrong, because it goes wrong in the same place every single time, and it has been going wrong in that same place since before I was born in Petrovici. In 1920, which, I promise you, has more to do with meteorites than you think, and I will get to that. Here is the wrong idea. It is not a stupid idea. It is not held by people who believe the Earth is flat or that the moon landing was staged. It is held by intelligent, curious people, the kind who read science articles for fun, and the idea is this: that a meteorite is fundamentally a mystery object, that when a rock falls out of the sky, it arrives as a sealed envelope, a piece of out there, and the best we can do is weigh it, cut it open, and guess. People treat the phrase, "we don't know where it came from," as the honest, humble, scientifically appropriate stance to take toward a fallen rock. It sounds modest. It sounds like good science. It is, in the vast majority of cases, simply wrong, and I intend to spend the next few minutes taking that wrongness apart, gear by gear, because underneath it is one of the most quietly spectacular achievements in the history of the physical sciences, and almost nobody outside the field knows it happened. Let me open something and come back to it, because that is the honest way to argue, and I am not going to insult you by pretending otherwise. The open question is this: if we can actually trace a meteorite back to a specific parent body, a specific place of origin millions of kilometers away, using nothing but the rock itself and some very old light, why does almost every news article about a new meteorite still describe it as coming from deep space, as though it fell from nowhere in particular? I will answer that directly, but first you need the mechanism, because I refuse to hand you a conclusion without giving you the machine that produces it. That has always been my complaint about popular science writing. It gives you the punchline and skips the joke. Start with what a meteorite actually is, mechanically, not poetically. The solar system formed 4.5 billion years ago out of a disk of gas and dust around the young sun. Most of that material fell into the sun itself or assembled into the 8 planets, but a great deal of it did not. Between Mars and Jupiter, Jupiter's gravity stirred a belt of would-be planetary material so hard that it never managed to clump into a single world. It stayed as rubble, asteroids, millions of them, ranging from dust to bodies 900 kilometers across. Collisions between these asteroids, over billions of years, have been chipping pieces off each other constantly. Some of those chips get kicked by gravitational resonances with Jupiter into orbits that cross Earth's path. Eventually, gravity does what gravity does, and one of those chips meets our atmosphere at somewhere between 11 and 72 kilometers per second, and if enough of it survives the fireball, it lands, and somebody's dashboard camera catches the flash, and by morning it is on the news being called a mystery. But it is not a mystery, and here is where the machine actually works. When light from an object is spread out into a spectrum, the chemical elements and minerals in that object each leave their own signature. Dark lines at exact wavelengths, like a fingerprint made of color instead of ridges. We have done this to asteroids from telescopes on Earth for decades. We have cataloged the spectral fingerprints of thousands of them. And when a meteorite lands, if there were enough witnesses with cameras, and in the era of the dash cam and the doorbell camera, there almost always are, we can triangulate its fireball path backward through the atmosphere, calculate its orbit before it ever touched air, and then compare that orbit and that rock's own mineral fingerprint against the catalog of known asteroid families. In a growing number of cases, we do not just know that a meteorite came from the asteroid belt in some vague sense. We know which specific collision event in which specific asteroid family flung off the exact piece of rubble you are holding in your hand. The 2008 meteorite that fell over the Nubian desert in Sudan, called Almahata Sitta, was tracked by telescope while it was still in space, before it ever hit the atmosphere. The first time in history that happened, and its fragments were matched to a specific class of primitive asteroid. That is not humility in the face of mystery. That is forensic science operating across 100 million kilometers and 4.5 billion years, and it closes the loop I opened a minute ago. The reason the articles still say deep space is not that we don't know better. It is that deep space sounds more exciting to an editor than a specific rubble pile 300 million kilometers from here that we have already photographed, even though the second sentence is the one that should actually make your scalp tingle. I need to tell you something about where I grew up, because it is not decoration. It is the reason I have spent 70 years angry at exactly this kind of laziness. I grew up over my father's candy store in Brooklyn, on the corner of a street that saw more foot traffic in an hour than most of Petrovici saw in a year, and the candy store sold newspapers and magazines, and I read every science fiction magazine that came through that store before my father could stop me, because a boy behind a cash register has a great deal of unsupervised reading time. What I noticed, even as a child, was that the pulp magazines of the 1930s treated a meteorite exactly the way people still treat one today, as a sealed box, a plot device, something that falls from nowhere and means anything the writer wants it to mean. A meteor brings a monster. A meteor brings a plague. A meteor brings a message. Nobody in those stories ever asked where the rock's orbit had been for the previous million years, because the orbit was not the point. The mystery was the point. And mystery sells copy, whether it is 1933 or the week this video was uploaded. I decided, somewhere in that candy store, that I did not want to write that kind of story, and later, when I actually began writing about robots and about the foundation and the fall of empires, I insisted. And this made me insufferable to certain editors, that even the fiction had to obey the mechanism. If something fell from the sky in one of my stories, I wanted to know why, in a universe governed by rules, it fell exactly there and not somewhere else. That instinct did not come from a physics class. It came from noticing, as a boy with a newspaper stand, that "we don't know" is very often just a more comfortable sentence than "we did the work." Now, let me open a second loop, because the first one is closed, and I do not believe in leaving you with nothing to chew on while I build the next argument. Here is the promise. I am going to tell you a number in a moment that is going to sound wrong to you. It is not wrong. It is one of the strangest true numbers in all of planetary science, and once you hear it, you will never look at a meteorite the same way again. Hold that thought. To get to that number, I need to walk you through the second piece of machinery, which is age. This is where my own training actually matters, because I did not start as a science fiction writer. I was trained as a biochemist. I earned my doctorate at Columbia in 1948, and biochemistry teaches you to think about time in a very specific way, as something recorded chemically, in bonds and ratios, not something you infer from a calendar. A meteorite is, quite literally, the single most precisely dated object a human being can hold in their bare hand. Inside these rocks, certain radioactive isotopes decay into stable daughter elements at rates so fixed, so immune to heat, pressure, or chemistry, that they function as clocks that started ticking the moment the rock's minerals crystallized and have not stopped since. Using rubidium decaying into strontium, and separately using lead isotopes locked inside microscopic mineral grains called calcium-aluminum-rich inclusions, scientists have dated pieces of the Allen meteorite, the one I mentioned falling on Mexico in 1969, to 4,567,000,000 years, give or take about 500,000 years. 500,000 years of uncertainty on a number that large is a precision of about 1 part in 9,000. Your kitchen scale is not that precise. Here is the number I promised you, the oldest solid material ever confirmed to exist anywhere in human hands. Older than any rock on Earth, older than any piece of the moon we brought back, older by tens of millions of years than the Earth itself finished forming, is sitting right now in meteorite collections, in university drawers, in some cases in the personal collections of amateur meteorite hunters who bought a fragment online for a few $100s. The single oldest thing a human being can physically touch is very often not in a museum vault behind glass. It is a rock somebody's neighbor found in a field that closes the loop, and it should also be doing something else to you, which is making the original wrong idea look even worse than I first described it. Because the popular framing is not just incomplete, it is precisely backward. People treat a meteorite as young and mysterious, a fresh arrival, an event that just happened. The truth is the opposite. The meteorite is the oldest object in the room, and the event, the fall, the fireball, the part that makes the news, is the least interesting, most recent 30 seconds in 4.5 billion years of that rock's existence. It is as though you met the single most historically significant person on Earth and asked them only about the last 30 seconds of their elevator ride. Let me tell you about an argument I had, because this is where the story gets personal in a way that matters. John W. Campbell, who edited astounding science fiction and who published nearly everything I wrote in the 1940s, had an editorial habit that I both admired and occasionally wanted to strangle him for. He would take a wrong idea, any wrong idea, scientific, social, doesn't matter, and instead of dismissing it, he would demand that you follow it to its logical conclusion and show, on the page, exactly where the gears stripped. He hated authors who wrote, and then, mysteriously, the object appeared. Because to him, that sentence was a confession that the author hadn't done the work of figuring out the mechanism. We fought about this constantly, sometimes over a single sentence for an entire afternoon in his office, because I would try to get away with a plot convenience, and he would ask me, not unkindly, "How does that actually happen, Isaac?" I use his method every time I do this kind of work now, including today, because the wrong idea about meteorites, that they are unknowable arrivals, survives for the exact reason Campbell used to hunt down. It lets people stop one step before the interesting part. It fell from space. Who knows is a stopping point. It fell from space, and here is exactly which collision, in which asteroid family, 4.5 billion years ago, produced the exact grain of rock now in this jar, is not a stopping point. It is a door. Campbell would have hated the lazy version of this story and loved the real one. And I have never stopped hearing his voice asking, "How does that actually happen?" every time I sit down to explain something. I want to open a third loop now, and this one is going to take a little longer to close because it deserves more room. The promise is this. There is a piece of this puzzle that genuinely does not sit comfortably with me, a place where the neat picture I have just built for you develops a crack, and I am not going to pretend otherwise, because pretending otherwise would make me exactly the kind of writer I have spent this entire video criticizing. Before I get to the crack, let me finish rebuilding the correct picture, brick by brick, because you deserve the whole structure before I show you where it is weakest. We have established that meteorites are old, the oldest solid matter available to human hands. We have established that many can be traced to specific parent bodies through spectroscopy and triangulated orbits. The third brick is composition. And this is where the wrong idea does its most damage. Because people assume that because a rock fell from the sky, it must be made of something exotic, something not found on Earth. It is almost the opposite. The overwhelming majority of meteorites, more than 85% of all witnessed falls, are chondrites, and a chondrite is, chemically, shockingly similar to the Sun. Not similar to Earth's crust, which has been baked, melted, separated into layers, and chemically weathered for 4.5 billion years, similar to the Sun itself, minus the hydrogen and helium that never condensed into solids. A chondrite is the unprocessed leftover of the material that built every planet, asteroid, and moon in this solar system, including you, because every atom of calcium in your bones and iron in your blood was forged in a star that died before the Sun was born, and passed through exactly this kind of unremarkable rubble on its way to becoming you. The meteorite is not exotic. It is the family album. It is not strange because it comes from somewhere alien. It is significant because it comes from everywhere, from the actual raw material every rocky thing in this solar system, us included, was built out of, and it has simply never been reprocessed the way Earth's own rocks have. Now the crack, because I promised you one, and I intend to deliver it honestly. For most of my working life, I held the position, and I taught it, and I wrote it in more than one essay for the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, that our accounting of where meteorites come from was essentially complete in category, if not in every individual detail. Asteroid belt, Mars, the Moon, 3 known sources, 3 well-understood ejection mechanisms, a closed and tidy list. I was wrong to be that confident, and I did not fully register how wrong until relatively late, when isotopic work on certain rare meteorite classes, Urielites among them, turned up chemical signatures that do not cleanly match any asteroid family we have cataloged, and do not match Mars or the Moon either. Some meteoriticists have proposed these fragments come from planetary embryos, small protoplanets that existed in the solar system's first few million years and were later destroyed entirely in collisions, leaving no surviving parent body anywhere for us to point a telescope at. If that is correct, then some of the rocks in our collections are the only remaining physical evidence that certain worlds ever existed at all. Worlds with no name, no known orbit, no surviving fragment large enough to see from Earth, known to us only because a few kilograms of their broken interior happened to fall on the right patch of ground at the right time for someone to notice. That unsettles me. Not because it is frightening in any personal sense, but because it means our confident, tidy taxonomy of where meteorites come from has a hole in it that we may never be able to close, since the evidence for the parent body's existence and the evidence for its destruction are, in some cases, one and the same rock. I have built my entire career on the idea that mechanism can always, eventually, be run backward to its source. Here is a case where the source itself may be permanently, structurally unrecoverable, and I will tell you plainly, that is the part of this subject that keeps me up at night more than any comet or asteroid ever has. That closes the third loop, and it should feel different from the others, because I did not hand you a satisfying resolution. I handed you a genuine limit. Let me use it, though, because even a limit can be a brick if you place it correctly, and it leads directly into the fourth and final assault on the wrong idea I started with. Here is the wrong idea again, stated one more time in its full, original softness. A meteorite is a mystery object from out there, best treated with a shrug and a sense of wonder. Here is what 4.5 billion years, a spectrometer, a triangulated fireball, a radiometric clock, and one very uncomfortable class of exception actually tell you instead. A meteorite is not a mystery. It is a document. Most of the time, we can read that document down to the specific paragraph, the specific collision, the specific family, the specific age to the nearest 500,000 years out of 4.5 billion. Occasionally, we encounter a document written in a language whose speakers are entirely gone, with no library left standing anywhere to check it against, and that is not a failure of the method. That is the method reaching all the way to its honest edge and telling you the truth about where the edge is. Both of those facts are more interesting than, who knows, it fell from space. And both of them are being thrown away every time a headline treats a new meteorite as an unsolved riddle instead of what it actually is. A rock that has, in most cases, already told us exactly who it is, and that in the rare cases where it hasn't, it is telling us something even stranger, that it may be the only surviving witness to a world that otherwise left no trace. I want to bring in one more person before I close this out, because I would be lying to you about my own life if I left him out, and that would be exactly the kind of omission I have spent this entire video arguing against. Carl Sagan and I disagreed about a great many things over the decades we knew each other, and agreed about a great many more. But the thing he understood better than almost anyone I ever worked with was that the size of a fact and the size of its emotional weight are not the same thing, and a good communicator's entire job is closing that gap. He would take a number like the age of a meteorite and refuse to let it sit there as an abstraction. He wanted you to feel the 4.5 billion years, not just read it. I did not always work that way. I trusted the mechanism to speak for itself, and mostly it does. But on this subject, I am going to borrow his instinct for the last minute of this video, because the mechanism has earned the right to be felt, not just understood. Every meteorite that has ever been recovered on Earth is older than every mountain range on Earth, older than every ocean basin, older than the continents themselves, which have been assembled and torn apart and reassembled more than once since the solar system's beginning. When you hold one, or even when you simply look at a photograph of one on a museum shelf, you are looking at the only kind of object that predates the planet you are standing on. The Earth itself, this entire world, every fact you have ever learned, every war, every civilization, every one of the roughly 117 billion human beings estimated to have ever lived, all of it happened after that rock already existed, fully formed, drifting in the specific orbit that would eventually intersect ours. The meteorite does not care about the news cycle it just generated. It was old before there was anyone around to be curious about it, and it will very likely outlast every institution currently arguing about what it means. The question the headlines ask, where did this come from, is almost every time the small version of a much bigger question, which is this: what does it mean that the oldest, most honest witnesses to the birth of this solar system are not locked away in some inaccessible vault, but are quite literally falling on us, constantly, indifferently, and that most of the time we simply are not listening carefully enough to hear what they are actually saying? So the next time you see a headline about a meteorite that has everyone talking, I want you to remember what you now know, because it is not a mystery object. It is not a message. It is not a sign. It is the oldest witness in the room, and the only real mystery left is why we keep treating the only things old enough to remember how we got here as though they were the ones who just arrived.